Welcome back. As Canada works to pivot our economy and trade, we are also thinking about new ways about manufacturing more at home. So where are the opportunities and what might we stop doing? Dennis Darby is President and CEO of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association. Dennis, thanks for being with us.
No problem. Thanks to be here.
So we are in almost a golden era of manufacturing where people are thinking in a new way about doing more here. We aren't necessarily going to offshore everything. Building things here, making things here is back in vogue. What is the opportunity to build the manufacturing base in Canada?
Well, first of all, we should try to level set. We're still selling, the majority of the manufactured goods we produce in Canada to the U.S. Regardless of reports about lessening dependency, still about 80% of what we produced, even last year, went to the U.S. So we are integrated in the supply chain. So we shouldn't expect for a minute that won't continue. What is different, though, is, as you mentioned, is the opportunity to build at home. And of course, the federal government, since it was elected, has talked about things like Buy Canada or Buy Canadian. The Ontario government has talked about, Buy Ontario. So those initiatives, which would help, offset some of the losses of exports to the U.S., which are down about $2.5 billion by the end of 2025, would really help. And that would mean things like defense, in the areas of construction of new housing, building new infrastructure. These are areas that are positive, really positive looking. But right now, we're waiting to see where things land, because at this point, lots of discussion, but not a lot of meat on the bones yet.
Yeah, fair enough. But are the discussions sensible? In other words, when we talk to, Sweden about a new fighter jet, should we say it has to be built here? If we're going to have Chinese electric vehicles, they have to be built in Canada. Can we create a manufacturing base with new partners beyond the U.S.?
Well, most certainly. I mean, even in the case of existing fighter jets, the F-35s, a lot of the work will be done in Canada. So there is a percentage of the manufacturing that had been committed by the manufacturer in Canada. It would be the same if we were to work with Sweden. And yes, we have an incredibly strong manufacturing base in the area of automobile parts and automobile assembly. We should really look at those. So yes, indeed, those are, and not just maybe to China, but also to Europe, how to get other companies to assemble here. We have a great workforce. We have great technology that we've developed over the years. And of course, ultimately, as we switch more and more to electric vehicles, or at least vehicles that use electric power, like hybrids, we have the potential of the minerals and the construction of those of the components. So yes, there's lots of upside. Not to mention the area of energy production, because everything from nuclear power to advanced technologies to help carbon capture, those are all technologies where Canada can be a manufacturing center.
Manufacturing, of course, will be less and less about a lot of employees. The human aspect of it will decline over time because of new technology. That's very good for corporations. It's very good for consumers. Not so good for manufacturing jobs. How far in the future are we looking at that sort of advanced robotics era? And do you worry about that for our sectors?
Well, actually, I worry if we didn't look at that. In fact, what we've seen, one of the encouraging signs, despite the fact we continue to hear from manufacturers that they're putting a pause on investment because of the uncertainty with the U.S., given that manufacturers are really caught in the crossfire of the tariffs. But we're hearing already that small and medium-sized companies are more and more looking at what we call Industry 4.0 or machine learning, because actually, despite everything, there continues to be a shortage of workers with the kinds of skills that manufacturers need, despite the current situation. So what that means is, if we can start to use more and more of these high-tech tools, machine learning, AI, what we call Industry 4.0, that's good for Canadian jobs, because the types of jobs that are there will be more highly more technical and require more skills, but it also gives us a chance to increase our output. So right now, despite everything going on, manufacturers in many sectors are still looking for people.
Dennis, so good to have you. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks.
Dennis Darby, President and CEO of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association. Diversifying Canadian exports is central to our economic future. So what kind of progress can we make, and how quickly? Stuart Bergman is Chief Economist at EDC. Stuart, thanks for being with us.
Hi, Amanda. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, that is sure the task at hand. So let's start with how quickly we can do that. The goal is ambitious, but how hard is it for the Canadian economy to pivot away from the U.S.?
Well, look, I'll give you a bit of an economist answer here. So you may not get the answer you're looking for, but it really depends, right? It really depends on the industry you're in. I mean, some industries tend to be far more integrated into the North American supply chain. You take autos as an example, or rely on specialized infrastructure to move their product. And so, pipelines needed to ship oil and gas are a good example of that. And there are, of course, other logistical considerations like the cost of bulk shipping. Whereas industries like crops or pharmaceuticals, or even if you think about some other consumer goods, those might be easier to ship overseas. And then, of course, you have exports of services. And I would add maybe digitally enabled services in particular that open enormous opportunities for trade diversification. And it's why, as I referenced earlier, only 50% of our services exports actually go to the United States. So I'll also say that it depends on the exporter, because whereas typically the bigger companies, the larger companies, tend to have the financial wherewithal to strategize around new markets and absorb the logistical costs that come with changing buyers. So you think about the cost of risk management, developing local contacts, or managing new regulatory realities, business cultures. The smaller ones don't. And then, of course, finally, it really depends on the contract terms that companies may be locked into. So it really very much depends on where you find yourself as to how easy it might be to pivot, not away from the United States, but to do more business in addition to the business you're doing in the United States. Because
we have to do it quickly, if we're planning policies that help us get there, it sounds to me as though you pick the ones that are easy to trade to Europe, to send raw materials, whether it's to China or India. In other words, if you were betting on which industries will succeed over the next decade, if our trade relationship with the U.S. deteriorates, you should look at the things that are easiest to diversify?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly makes sense. There's low-lying fruit. I will definitely go back to exports of services being the low-lying fruit, not dependent on the infrastructure that we know, where we know, we still have some room to build. The links tend to be a lot more seamless. And so digitally enabled services in particular, of course, we have long-standing ties in energy with the Asia-Pacific region already. We have now enhanced our infrastructure when it comes to energy trade in Asia-Pacific, including the expansion, the TMX, and adding capacity on West Coast ports, LNG export terminals. So that certainly helps as well. So those might be kind of a bit of a low-lying fruit. And then, we start to have to look at some of the industries that might take a little bit more time and might be harder to diversify.
Thank you so much for this, Stuart. Really appreciate your time today.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Stuart Bergman is Chief Economist at EDC. Coming up, Canada needs to improve its wealth creation. To do that, we need to get more efficient. Stay with us.